we did. So we have on our campus kind of an on-premise software as a service WordPress environment. We have two of them actually, one for kind of individuals and one for more departments. That's not run in OpenShift currently. That's just for other reasons, not really technical reasons. And we tend to push people towards those if they can, because there is a group that maintains and supports that for them. There are cases where someone already has an existing WordPress site and doesn't want to manage necessarily the server anymore, but they don't want to use the SaaS offering because they have plugins that they want to use that the support team doesn't want to support, things like that. So then they might stand up WordPress on our OpenShift environment. And so we've been allowing people to do this. So we've been on OpenShift since version 2, and in the version 2 days, they had quick starts. So we had WordPress quick starts so that people would quickly stand up WordPress. They didn't have to worry about, understanding they need to set up the database, they need to set up all this and that. So we made it fairly simple for them. And when we migrated to OpenShift version 3, we just simulated what we had with the quick starts and the templates to make it easier for people to start WordPress environments. We also have people that do the same for Drupal. Today we're talking about WordPress, but everything that we say basically is the same for Drupal, except that you're using the Drupal code and the Drupal tools. So today we'll talk about WordPress. On my screen I have our Git repository for what we use for building our templates and images. Basically what we have is we have a Docker file that we use to build a WordPress image and store it in the OpenShift registry. I'm not going to go through everything in here, but basically it's basing it off of the Red Hat PHP image, so that it's no different than if they installed it using PHP. And then it's going through and doing a couple things, setting up some custom things with the Apache. Like, for example, we have some reverse proxies. It's identifying those kinds of things. And I'm installing the WP CLI tools. If it was Drupal, it'd be installing Drush. And then has a bunch of scripts that a former colleague of ours put together to make getting all this set up pretty easy. So now I'm going to go back and then look at just one of the scripts. And this is the main one that does the heavy lifting. So it sets up a bunch of environment variables, which it then uses the env subs command to change the various configuration files. Sets up a few other things for Apache. Again, we're just doing this since when the container starts up, the customer can't change these, and we're setting up so that it's going to be somewhat performant for them. And a few other things. And one of the big things it does near the very end here is, depending on the type of install they did, particularly for multi-site, it uses the WP CLI to download and install WordPress for them. And that happens on the initial install. There's some code earlier on that says, oh, if it already recognizes as a WordPress installed, it's not going to try and install it again. So again, we have a Jenkins job that builds these images and pushes them to the internal OpenShift registry. And then the fun part happens, I'm going to switch over here because it's a little easier to read, is our OpenShift template. So I'm not going to go through again the entire template, but basically it sets up the PHP and it sets up the database server, the passwords and all that stuff. And then at the very end, we have I'll get there someday, we have a bunch of questions we ask them so that they can customize the environment to a certain extent when it gets set up for them. And so OpenShift templates have the support for asking these questions when you create a WordPress image. So now if we go over to our web console, so in our OpenShift web console, all of our custom templates, we have this UNC tab where all those show up. And one thing I forgot to mention, we do have two types of WordPress installs. We have what we call the standalone, which is PVC based. So if someone wants basically like they don't want to manage the WordPress code, they do this, and then the WordPress gets installed in a persistent volume. Then they can go into the admin interface and click the buttons to say, okay, update my plugins, update the version of WordPress, all that stuff, so that they can do it as simple as possible. But those are the people that want to actually manage some aspects of WordPress. Maybe they're writing their own plugins. Maybe they want to manage the plugin separately for whatever reason. We have that where it sets up so that it'll do a basic install for them, but then the code is managed through Git rather than just installed on the PVC. So we do the same thing for Drupal. We provide our customers with the two options depending on their needs. So if they just need a simple WordPress and want to manage very little of it and push buttons to update it, they'll use the standalone, which we call the PVC one. Or if they want to do more managing, they'll use the Git-based one. So if we just quickly walk through, just wanted to show all those questions at the end. Here's where they can answer all those questions. And then we provide in some default values and some things like username and passwords. They don't need to fill in. We're using the little simple regex that is provided in templating to automatically generate those. And if you were to create one, it would show you those when the page closed. And additionally, we have in this Git repository, we have a description, a README with the description of what all the fields do in the template. But we also have custom customer-facing documentation on our knowledge base site that kind of walks them through some of the basics of this. Our customers do reach out to us sometimes if they run into trouble, and we have to help them out with those that may not be covered in our customer documentation. We try to use those as opportunities to update the documentation. Another thing that we do offer that's kind of new-ish is we do have shibboleth proxies and a WordPress shibboleth plugin that a former employee of ours wrote a plugin for WordPress so that you can integrate shibboleth in the WordPress. It works well enough for what our customers need. We can provide more information later on that would take a little more time to go into if others are interested. One of the challenges which we mentioned on a previous call for us is getting customers to maintain and update WordPress. Again, with the quick start, the standalone quick starts, they can easily get a notification when they log in that says, oh, there's a new version of WordPress, there's a new version of these plugins, click this button and update it. The people that are using the Git-based one is a little more difficult because they need to actually go and commit the updates themselves. There's been a challenge for making sure people are updating it. When they sign up for our OpenShift service, they do have to agree to a terms of service saying that they will maintain, like regardless of whether it's WordPress or not, they will update their code. They will maintain that if a security vulnerability in whatever programming language and whatever frameworks that they're using in their programming languages comes out, they're responsible for updating it. We are trying to figure out how we would put together some ways to notify those who are horribly out of date, and we're still investigating some of that. One of the things that we've put together is we gather some kind of KPI data, and we're pumping it into log files and having Splunk consume it, and we have these kinds of dashboards that show this information. So, for example, over on the right-hand side, we see the templates that we've created, and some of them are the ones that Red Hat provides with OpenShift. And we see the numbers of the ones, but we don't have the versions right now. So one of the additional things that we're doing is, let me go over to my command line window, is we're putting together some tools that'll connect to the pods and find out what the versions are based on the appropriate files in either Drupal or WordPress and what that data is, and then we'll pipe that into another log file or the same log file, and then consume that data in Splunk so we can do reporting on it, and then we'll have information for us, for our information security office, and then if we decide to contact customers saying you're grossly out of date, you're supposed to be updating this because you agreed to do that with your terms of service, then we'll do that. And this is a very crude version, but all it's doing is connecting to a pod and running exec and then grepping in the appropriate file to pull the data. And we'll make that prettier once we start putting in the file, but that was just a quick example I wanted to show of what we're doing. And so I ran through that a lot faster than I thought I would. So I'm kind of at the end of what I want to talk about. What about it? Yeah, and so again, all this stuff was specific to WordPress, but the same applies for our Drupal templates as well.
There's a question.
We have a question. The question was from Chris at Michigan.
So do you offer customers direct access to their file systems outside of the CMS UI?
So they have access through the OCRSH command or through the terminal tab in the OpenShift web console, and they have access, if it's stored in a persistent volume, they have access to it that way. But that's the limit they have. In our other SaaS-based WordPress environments, they do not get any access except web access through the WordPress environment, or the WordPress web interface.
Let's see if there's any other questions here. There was one that was asked in the chat and answered in the chat about from Wade.
Oh yeah, so yeah, in the OpenShift environments, we don't really have people set up with Varnish and Redis. We do have one particular site that we discovered that was set up with that to make it performant, but it was something that was done outside of the norm and not anything that we have templates or automated ways. It'd be up to the customer to set that up themselves. We do have that in some of our non-OpenShift WordPress environments for the high traffic sites. And again, we know at least one customer on our OpenShift platform that is using Varnish and Redis.
And there's one last.
Yeah, that's interesting, Chris. I'd like to talk to you about that. Again, a former colleague of ours set most of this up to when we were doing our conversion from 2 to 3, and we're happy to hear other ideas about how to make improvements of it. Again, some of the updating of WordPress has been recently just because we've been looking more into some of the statistics and looking into options for container security scanning and stuff. How do we identify anybody that's not actually updating? What do we do about it? So that's kind of where we are. We're still in an investigative process of improving some of this because this has been set up for well over a year now and hasn't really changed much since we originally set it up. Do you have any comments, William?
I mean, part of the struggle there is that as far as our customers go, the WordPress sites that they end up setting up are all going to be vastly different. So some people end up wanting to actually customize the code behind it itself, right? And so we can't kind of blanket override that because then we'd be basically effectively overriding any changes they made. Now that's supposed to be kind of the priority behind the Git-based ones so that they can actually use Git to manage their code. Unfortunately, customers use what you give them, and they don't necessarily all do that. And so that's kind of the trick as far as updating. And also, if we were to, force upgrade of WordPress, and plugins then go out of date or plugins stop working, et cetera, there's kind of a struggle there with the customers. And so we actually have a kind of a policy as far as using our platform that the customer is technically responsible for patching their own applications. And we do want to be involved as far as alerting them to this, but at the end of the day, it is their responsibility, it is their application.
And one other thing is that another thing we've been dealing with is not just with WordPress, but what versions of PHP are they using? For example, PHP 5.6 and 7.0 go end of life at the end of the calendar year, and how do we get people to migrate? Okay, WordPress will migrate fine, but maybe the plugin that they heavily depend on is I don't know, it's still using something from 5.6 or something like that. And those have been challenges as well, about how do we identify those, get those customers to migrate and such. So I don't have answers for them, but those are the kind of the challenges that we're facing, especially with the large number of people that took advantage of our templating and quick starts.
Hey guys, this is Chris again. One question that it was too long to type into chat. So first of all, thank you for this overview. It's great. It's right where we are. Well, you're ahead of us, so it's really timely. For your Git-based customers, are they forking your repo and making changes to it? How is their code integrated into the site, or is that something that you're doing via the template?
I think we do the initial install for them, and then they're responsible from that as their base for the
Yeah. So the template sets up things like, because they're also using databases on the platform too, right? So the template goes ahead and sets up like WP config and whatnot to actually connect to databases the way that OpenShift expects them to. That way the customer doesn't have to have the knowledge there in order to do that. And then from that point on, they're effectively managing the repo.
So the GitLab repo that you showed kind of provides the base image, but then their repo is the one that's providing the code into the file system. Is that
correct?
Accurate?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And one thing I forgot to mention, I've already done this for a few other people. If you, our Git repository is restricted to our campus network, but if anybody wants copies of our OpenShift templates, I'm happy to provide them to you. And I mean, obviously, you can, you don't have to use them, but you're welcome to see what we did and ask questions about why we did it.
I actually hadn't seen that, but it looks very similar.
Yeah, we haven't seen that one, Wade, but we might take a look at that. Thank you.
And you might fork it and update it, because I'm sure if it was an OpenShift evangelist thing, it was perhaps just what we use in demo when we're doing our live demo, so it might not be.
So
I
was going to type some of this, but we'll just come off mute for a second. I played around with it a little bit. It does have a Git option as well, but they take a bit of a perhaps different approach from the limited exposure I've had to the stuff. They don't fork, but they don't include all of the WordPress software. They just include a directory for templates, for themes, plugins, that type of thing, and merge it in during the build. So it's still a standalone copy of WordPress, but they've merged in the things that people maybe should want to be able to have control over. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it looks very familiar to what you just demonstrated. Yeah.
One
I'd also like a copy of the repo.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying I'll chime in for a copy of the repo as well, please.
So one thought here in Michigan that we're developing is the idea of maybe an 80% use case and then a 20% use case where for those people that don't have, particularly on the Drupal side, if they don't have any custom modules or themes, we provide a base for them where the themes and modules are stored in a persistent volume. We would update Drupal core via the base layer, and then have all the pods inherit that base layer, and then use Drush to update the modules. And then for those people that are doing completely custom stuff, have a different model, but I don't think we have reached a real good agreement as to what that model is. And maybe it's what you guys are talking about, where if you're on the 20%, you have the technical capability to assume responsibility for all your updates yourself. So, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think for us mostly, if people are doing custom stuff, they'll just update it to their Git repository from the start. And if people aren't using anything special plugins, then they use our kind of SaaS offering is what we direct them to, because there's a support team behind that who provide support on the plugins and stuff. We're actually being kicked out of our conference room, so we have to take off. Sorry.
All right, that's all right. Well, thank you very much.